I'd like you to suggest some other things as well. Yep, so not things we've already got on the list. That'd be great. 20 minutes. And I will walk around and come and have a listen in too. And be prepared to report back with a spokesperson from your group.
One of the real challenges we found, and we know from this, this particularly is my role as a language and learning advisor, TESOL background, is that we know students come in at this level. We know that this is an ongoing thing, and we sometimes kind of leave them to flounder and to go on and try and develop your English. And we understand that there's professional development work is needed. We can't expect content experts in whatever field to also be TESOL experts in language. So that kind of either professional development, I work in a space where we do some team teaching. So as the language person, I do the comments on the language and the development of that, and the content expert discusses that. Now we know this model is, this is funded through the, the funding comes from the pressure from industry. So an engineering cohort, industry comes and says, we need our graduates to have this kind of, to develop these areas to communicate. So I think trying to get some kind of understanding that this is a long-term process. Anybody in our field knows that we get sent students to us to say, fix their English, as if it's going to be some short thing. This is being really transparent with students when they're coming in, that you finished your IELTS test and you've come into uni, your language development does not stop, and it's not going to happen by osmosis. We've seen studies where students come in at a certain level, maybe don't kind of exist in their own community, and then their language can drop by the time they've left. So these are the kind of expectations. I also think as institutions we need to have some way of being able to facilitate this. We think by osmosis students are we're going to put a local student and an international student side by side, and they're just going to get along and they're going to integrate. And we know it's really difficult. We know that local students don't tend to be on campus as much, and then international students tend to be using these. So finding some way as an institution, I think, is how we take the responsibility to facilitate this and to be able to create this mentoring and find some way to, rather than just saying leave it. So we have a lot of online resources. Almost all institutions have their online resources. What I think is really lacking is telling students how to use these resources. There's a website with grammar and things that you can improve, but how do they do it? What are the strategies? And making it clear that this is a ongoing process. And just like we do for your content for first year, you don't start at third year content for a first year student, and the language strategy development is exactly the same. We need to have, and we put this in place. We can't expect someone in nursing or engineering to be thinking of that. We already know the teaching load and how much they've got going. So if institutions are really serious about this, invest. We need the expertise. You need these TESOL people with these teaching backgrounds to help and scaffold those things into the course. Pie in the sky, great ideas.
Alan, do you want to respond to that? So Wes has said, we need more TESOL staff. We need trained language specialists, like learning advisors, working with us. Team teaching is a great idea. Providing professional development for non-TESOL specialists. But universities who use Studiosity, hands up. I think there are 20 Australian universities. We were just debating, some of the pros and cons about that online support. I had said I was very ambivalent myself at the beginning, especially when it was called Your Tutor, because I think it was very easily confused with every other, 123, Help Me, essays.com. They've changed the name to Studiosity. I have changed my view in that I like being able to say to students, that is a legitimate learning service, please go there. Of course, the downside is, I think, as Alan rightly says, an online service, a generic online service, no matter how good, can't replace the relationship building both between the language specialist and the staff member and the language specialist and the student.
I just wanted to add to that all of our students are totally online, so we do provide that online support. We do have Studiosity, but we also have 8 till 10, 5 days a week, and then during weekends 9 to 9, I think it is 9 to 6. Phone support and email support for students, so they can ring in, email in, chat if they do have a problem. And also their online tutors are not available 24 hours a day. They're available over a period of time. So that rapport, that relationship is a very strong focus of our online education services. So we're an online enabler. We have Swinburne University as one of our partners. Ryan's here, and Western Sydney is one of our partners.
That sounds like a nice combination. That sounds like a good compromise. Did we have anything else to say about Loach? captured your thoughts? Okay, this group, what were you looking at? So remember the data showed that students who perceive there are lots of opportunities to cheat are more likely to engage in contract cheating.
So just a few sort of randomish points. Sydney here has an online quiz, but before they do the online quiz, because of issues with students actually doing it outside of class, then you don't know how it's being done. So it's now has to be done in class, but also before they do it in class, there is actually the agreement that they have to accept before the quiz opens to say that they are doing this. So just as they have had with written assignments, and most of us have a cover sheet that gets submitted, whether it's submitted electronically or in hard copy. For the quizzes, there is now an I accept before the quiz opens to say I am doing this during class time by myself, and if it's not that, then I will get 0 for this.
Cindy, how does that work? Do you feel like that has reduced the perception that there are lots of opportunities to cheat?
Yeah, I just put it on a few days ago, and then I'm testing, see whether it works, but I feel it will give a student a head start or a kind of warning message, and as what he mentions, is more cheating is from the students. So if the student are aware cheating is not acceptable, and make them aware of that before they start it, and most of students will thinking, oh, I shouldn't cheat at the time of doing it.
And do you still invigilate? Do you still supervise?
Yeah,
You're still there as
yeah.
well?
I'm still because it's in class online quiz.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now here's a little anecdote. I like it. I think it's a great idea. When I was in Mexico last year, I mentioned they have some interesting academic integrity issues. I was working with a colleague and he had the same idea. He came and said to me, my class, I'm trying to think what his subject is. I think it's engineering. Anyway, he said, my class has got to do this, in-class test. But we don't have a proper exam hall. It's like this. We're all really close by, and there's nothing I can do to change the chair setup. So they're so close. They're like this. It's going to be really hard not to, look. I said, oh, so how did you solve that problem? He said, I just got them all to write an academic integrity statement at the beginning, and then I know they won't cheat. And I was like, okay. So how did that work out for you?
Mine's different.
Because
my unit is statistics, so it's to do with randoms, to do with numbers and calculations. And what I did is I put a random number generation, and also random questions, and also students may have different speed of answering the question. Hence, the chance having the same question between students is very low.
So, I think that's how you reduce the opportunities to cheat. I've got to say now, the academic integrity statement's not a bad thing to have. It's a nice reminder, but I would suggest what you do by randomising the questions is much more effective about reducing that perception that there are lots of opportunities to cheat and telling the student that. Because my colleague in Mexico, I was like, so how'd that work out? And he goes, I can't believe it, we had lots of cheating. He said, but they wrote the statement. I'm like, yeah. So I think a very practical solution, often we imagine we do this thing and that's going to sort it, but I think the randomised questions are the more effective ones.
So far, the only chance they can cheat is by, at the same time, doing the quizzes and open other online material or the seminar notes. They look at it and compare it and use copy the formula.
Well.
But now, because I put down this declaration and then I also invigilate.
Right, you've
so
got it all.
I got them
I
all.
like it all. Invigilate, academic integrity statement, randomised questions, think about seating. You've got to do a whole bunch of stuff. Catherine?
So are they randomised from an item bank, or just the order of the questions is randomised?
Not the order, but the contents and the numbers provided to the student, because to do calculations. So I got a group of numbers, and individual numbers randomized. Hence, a set number each student have different set of number to calculate.
So you use item banking, do you, to do that? Because each student does a different exam, or they do the same exam in a different order?
Same exam.
You can set up
Same exam.
to generate
You
random
can
Yeah, I like it.
you can randomize the number, you can randomize the content, you can randomize the answers, the solutions, which one come up first. Yeah.
Any other suggestions, guys, about reducing that perception that there are lots of opportunities to cheat?
Just picking up quickly again on what the OES people are doing, was with their online staff having a community of practice, trying to ensure consistency of information that goes to that group, which in fact is easier to control in many respects than the face-to-face teaching in the online environment, because all the communications go out as a group, and there is a structured approach that actually does.
Community of practice to support one another. We talk about professional development. That's a great example. Often we think we can't do it in an online environment. We can. It just requires some more thinking.
The standardisation of the comms.
Yes.
Standardisation of the communications.
Yes. Especially if the students are hearing the same message from all the academics in the institution.
Consistency of
If there's consistency in
message,
messaging, then they get that perception, oh, the academics are clued on. It's not just Joe and Mary that's on.
Exactly.
And
And
Tim
maybe it's easier in the
Lee's
online environment than
not
it is
talking
in
about it. Yeah.
all our diverse.
That's right. So a lot
curriculums.
of the resources we're developing, a lot of the resources we're developing the same resource for students and online teachers. So it's exactly the same, but slightly different wording. But the students will be saying, "Oh yeah, my teacher's getting the same message." So it works.
It's not just having that idea that there's a standard approach to plagiarism and the communication of plagiarism. It's also having standard descriptors for assessment tasks. If we say essay, everybody knows what it is. If we say reflective piece, and similarly within our rubrics. If we have elements within our rubrics which are consistent across a number of units and a number of tasks, then students are able to understand what's important for them.
Big business have databases now which gives data lakes of information around policy adherence. So this is not so much for the students but for the educators. We know that in a big university setting, through audits, adherence to policy is a variable. So if we had a process where we could manage positively manage the adherence processes of the educators to know what the problems are and provide them with solutions, but we're tracking all that, then there's another, from a quality assurance perspective, then that's another part of the platform.
Can you give an example about what you're talking about specifically?
Well, there's databases out there where you send out all the policies and say you need to read this, and it tracks when you open it, when you read it, when you answer the questions, and it comes back and says 70% of our staff have read the policy around contract cheating, etc.
Right.
So I kind of then know that I've got a critical mass of people who are thinking about the process at least. Okay. And then you can give them some exemplars of how they may deal with it.
Yeah.
So it's not just the students, it's the
Absolutely
educators.
not. No.
We were given a scenario of a student who'd struggled through first year, got into second year and was beginning to have difficulty with her subject. The lecturer had an open door policy. The door was open but no one was home. Never answered his email. Her tutor was our nervous PhD student who'd rather be in a dark room, and eventually due to lack of feedback and a dispirited sense of the learning environment, she resorts to contract cheating. And we were asked to look at these issues, and we had a robust discussion. I just want to say Max solved it with the VU first year model. Unfortunately, due to the first year model, you don't even need to be a Scientologist anymore. We looked at, with the learning and teaching environment, managing expectations across the entire environment, starting with the student. What do they expect? And in this case, we had a student who had barely passed first year. So did that student have those independent learning skills that they needed, or were they still very dependent on extrinsic devices such as lecturers? So looking at, well, should she have passed in the first place? Was she ready for second year? We looked at how we can use peer learning and teaching, and in particular, if you've got a large cohort, using forums rather than having students email lecturers with the same question 1,000 times. Just say to students, really, if you've got a question, you put it on the forum, and we encourage students to be answering those questions as well to give them a sense of community, but also moderating it with the staff so that they know that God is watching them, or the first year model. We also had a case of a nervous PhD student. We have to remember that tutors and new teachers also need to feel supported, and that the limitations of care, including, you know, what they should be doing but what they don't have to do. And also, of course, realistic workloads for staff. We had an interesting discussion about what does care mean. Not only what does the student expect of a learning and teaching environment, but as staff, what can we reasonably provide? And we felt that if we had this ecosystem going, that hopefully a student like this might be supported to the point where there are other things going on rather than resorting to contract cheating.
Yeah. So, from what you've said, you guys have actually just workshopped the scenario. Was it a useful way to get you discussing all those topics? That's the point about what we're trying to work out. Is it a useful thing to do on one page, come up with a scenario which we hope encapsulates the findings, and then get you to have a robust discussion? That's the whole idea.
I think the focus discussion was so helpful, because otherwise we'd all die of anecdotitis.
That's right. That's what we see a lot of workshops on academic integrity. What happens is it ends up being a whinging session. We all have a lot to whinge about, so that's what happens, you know, but we don't stay focused on the solutions, you know. So that's our idea about simple, focused scenarios with questions that keep you in the discussion coming up with solutions. Good.
But importantly, we still got to whinge. So that was...
And you still got to whinge, and nobody pretended that there's a magic fix. One of the things the project's been very nervous about doing and very, very wary of doing is creating one pages with tick boxes. If you do this, tick that, tick, 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 job done, authentic assessment, no more contract cheating. Because we know it's not that simple. So what we're trying to do is create accessible, simple, but not too long, resources that will just get you talking about it, give you the opportunity to air your grievances, but also come up with a more positive solution focus. That's the idea of what we're trying to do. Glad you liked it.
I wanted to add one, that the first year should be taught by the most respected educator in the group or the discipline. Normally what happens, we give it to, I mean, at the moment the first year model at Victoria University is different, or Max is going to have a fight with me again. What I'm trying to say is that first year is normally given to the junior most, the first time teaching type of educator, which does not get the message across.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We need our professors more engaged, I think, in the teaching process. Okay, but they're not rewarded for that. They're only rewarded for how many A-star publications they get published in a year.
Absolutely.
Okay, and our last group. You guys are looking at, tell me again, assessment. What are we looking at? So managing risk for different assessment types. Guys, if you want to look at those resources in your pack, managing the risk for different assessment types and the likelihood of outsourcing different assessment types. In this type of activity, we tried to come up with an interactive activity to get people thinking about the findings. A different approach again.
We were having a look at those two sheets. We'd found the discussion resource was absolutely fabulous. You could use it as a stimulus to so many different types of discussions for staff, for students, for reviewing assessment tasks and so on. And so one of the things we thought was that you could come with this sheet and the conversation could be managed and could flow following the interests of those parties who were there. The suggestions we made was more use of colour, where you would use colour for the hierarchies. So different shades of green, different shades of red. So you can see very quickly the differences between staff and student. It was really powerful. The other thing we would say for... very good. Very good, yes. The other suggestion was to put the answers on the verso of the sheet. So the beginning is simply discussion. And then you turn around and you've got another type of discussion. So powerful,
so then people
fabulous.
can fight about what they think is the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. We were just thinking not to give the answers. We didn't want to pretend we know the answers because we don't. Actually, when we first were putting these together, we did resources, we did all sorts. We've got so many. We've got hundreds of them. And we just like discussion. And it was like 1, brainstorm, 2, brainstorm, 3, we don't know the answers. So we were sort of reluctant to tell people because we don't know either.
Yeah.
But that's a good idea.
We then moved to the second sheet and thought it's a perfect pair to the first one. So it takes you to those assessment types and it drills down and shows the risks, the values and the strategies. So you move away from don't do short-term turnaround because we would normally do this, but it actually gives you an idea of when you would use it, how you could use it and why you would use it. So you're making informed decisions. So this is mostly for the teaching staff, this second one. The first one could be used equally for tutors, experienced teaching staff, coordinators, students, the whole gamut.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what we've been thinking too. Often when we've been trying to put this together, we're like, who's our audience? But very often what we end up writing is something, depending on what your purpose is, you could use it with students, you could use it with course coordinators, you know. So in the end we're like, well, actually, up to you. Okay, any other suggestions from this table?
Just one overarching one. We've all looked at different ones. One thing I could say is maybe you could number them, give each resource a number or a letter or an identifier so that when you're saying table 1 is looking at page A, right? And so that if you've got a whole stack of them, then we spend a lot of time. But even for the future, that if this is going to exist somewhere, maybe just a very quick way that we can identify which sources,
Although what we're imagining, these documents will be discrete items on the website that people will say, hey, what we need to do is an index. I'm looking for something on assessment, I've got half an hour, I'm really struggling, oh, there's something quick. And they may not, if it's numbered number 10, they'll be like, oh, I don't know, but definitely the workshop's numbering would be a good idea.
That was actually what we were saying here with this one too. If it was online and interactive, and if we clicked it and said it's 1 and then the answer came up, that would be even better. So we thought you were
online and interactive.
So if it was online and interactive, that would be great.
So these are the first drafts. The way we're planning to do the website, I don't know if some of you've gone to the website at the moment, it's just static, but the Nautilus with the 4 segments that we think encapsulates our findings, it's going to be interactive. You click on a particular segment and it takes you to the resource for that, and then you click on that and it links you back. So for example, where you said those 2 are a matching pair, they would be linked. Exactly. So we've got a little graphic designer working on the interactivity, but we've got to get the resources right before we start uploading. Yeah, but numbering for workshops, great idea. I was chuckling myself. Great. Okay. Does everyone feel they've had an opportunity to share their experience, to share their ideas? Is there anything we're missing? Anything we feel we haven't covered? Great. Okay. Well, that's it from me then. That's our findings from our project. There'll be more coming. We were supposed to finish in October, but we got an extension because we had so much more data. So what we've still got to come is the analysis of the new HEP data. So we have 4 new HEPs. And they're quite distinct, so we're busy analysing that. The qualitative data from the students, the qualitative data from the staff. We've got a paper coming out in relation to I gave you a couple of slides around authentic assessment and breach data, and also the procurement notices. Now we're agonising that they're 2 separate papers, so about 5 more papers in the next year. As we keep developing and analysing our data, we'll be developing more resources. It will be online, it will be interactive. Register on the site and then you can see when things go up. We've been trying, our aim right now has been to go and collaborate with as many of our colleagues as we can so that what we put up there is actually going to be useful. So we're still going to Brisbane and Sydney, so watch the space. In the next couple of months it'll all be going up there without the word draft on them. So thank you for helping, thank you for collaborating, I appreciate it.
Thank you.